Hello, everybody. Today, what we're going to do is discuss infectious disease. So, for this lesson, as you can tell, our focus question is how can infectious diseases be transmitted and affect our well being? So, by the end of the lesson, I'm hoping that you can describe how infectious diseases are transmitted and explain how they can be prevented. So, just to give us an overview, infectious disease, when we talk about infectious disease, we mean disease that can be passed on from one person to another or from an animal to a person. We're talking about diseases or infections that are not inherited through our genetics. Okay. And they are something we pass because we've come in contact with something called a vector. So, a vector is anything that carries disease, anything that carries bacteria, viruses, protozoa. A vector can be a surface, such as a doorknob or a desk. A vector can be an animal. A vector can be a human being. A vector can be food. It could be water. So, anything that passes infectious disease from one person to another or between people. So, when we look at ways that infections can be passed on, now, let me erase this first, or in other words, how can they be transmitted? That's what we're going to look into now. So, if you look at my screen here, you'll notice that we have four different modes of transmission. First, through direct contact, such as by shaking hands with someone. You directly touch them, they have the germ or the microbe on their hands, and it passes over to you. Secondly, through indirect contact, maybe someone opened a door or flushed a toilet, and you then opened the door or flushed the toilet and picked up that bacteria. Third, through airborne contact, meaning diseases can be passed through the air through coughing, sneezing, just talking closely to somebody in their space, and you breathe in the air that carries the pathogen. And finally, we have foodborne infection, and this is where infections by microorganisms can be passed through food that is not properly prepared, water that is not treated properly. So these are routes of pathogen transmission. Okay, now other routes of pathogen transmission would be through animal contact. So you'll notice animal-borne infection. These are infections caused by contact with animals or insects. Insects such as mosquitoes can carry diseases and transmit diseases such as malaria or West Nile virus. Ticks can spread Lyme disease. Animals can spread rabies and also different types of influenza viruses. And something else we mentioned is waterborne infection in some areas of the world or even in nature. The drinking water or the water that we drink is not treated and kept safe for us to drink. And sometimes the foods we eat are washed or sprayed with contaminated water, you'll notice. And even from swimming or wading in contaminated streams, lakes, or reservoirs can spread disease. And then finally, our blood-borne pathogens. These are pathogens that are transmitted through contact with blood, parts of the blood, or bodily fluids. And we use this term blood-borne to kind of take into account all fluids that would come out of our body that could transmit infection. And when we look at infection around the world, waterborne, foodborne, insect-borne, blood-borne, these diseases are worldwide. Just because we live in the United States with good drinking water and good healthcare doesn't mean that these types of infections cannot, affect us. So, the different types of pathogens you should be aware of, and you probably came across in the previous assignment dealing with different types of STIs, bacterial infections, and if we remember, bacteria, they're single-celled organisms, and they make us sick when the toxins that they produce affect our healthy cells. Some common bacterial diseases would be staphylococcal infections, and these are bacteria that normally infect our skin, sometimes in the form of acne, boils, styes, which are eyelid infections. Also, wounds, when we get a cut or scrape that's not cleaned and treated properly, it can become infected with what we would call a staph infection. Streptococcal infections. Many of you may have suffered from strep throat. That's a pretty common infection of the throat that is easily treated with antibiotic medication. Also, another type of bacterial disease would be pneumonia, which is an infection in the lungs. And people with pneumonia, your body responds to that by creating extra mucus, so that the idea is to get rid of that bacteria. But if you're not treated with an antibiotic, those bacteria can continue to reproduce and just cause more illness and more, unbalance, or take your body out of homeostasis. Legionnaire's disease. This is a waterborne illness. Again, you can get that from drinking water that's not been treated properly. And then another bacterial disease would be tuberculosis, or TB. This is an airborne bacterial disease where the bacteria can get into your lungs and cause a chronic inflammation of your lungs. Bacterial infection treatment. The way we treat infections with bacteria are by administering or giving antibiotic medications. Now, the thing with antibiotics is that we want to make sure that we take the antibiotics as they're prescribed. And we want to take them over the full course, meaning the whole length of time we're supposed to be taking them, and on the schedule that they're prescribed. Otherwise, they won't work the way we want them to, and they become ineffective after a while at treating many types of bacterial infections. Viruses. So talked about bacteria. I'd like to get into viruses now. Viruses are even smaller than bacteria. They're minute, ultra microscopic microbes that live inside other cells. I mean, they literally use the genetic material in our cells, the DNA, to reproduce on their own. And then what happens is they reproduce to the point where our healthy cells can't hold them anymore, and those cells burst. And that's what causes that feeling of illness and discomfort when you have infection with a virus. And also, viruses are so microscopic that they can actually infect bacteria. So a bacteria can actually have a virus. Some common viral diseases. First, the common cold. And what's so different, we've all had a cold. And you may wonder, why can't we get a vaccine against the common cold? But the thing is, the common cold can be caused by over 200 different viruses. So it'd be really, really difficult to create a vaccine that would be effective in preventing infection from the common cold. And it's one of these things where, we do feel sick with it. Sometimes a cold is worse than other times, but generally, we recover within a week or two and feel just fine. So our immune systems work on them. The one that is a little more serious, but we do have some vaccines for, is influenza or the flu. And, usually with the flu, it's not serious, but when we have people who are elderly or have other health conditions, or even young children infected with influenza or the flu, it can be very serious. Fortunately, we do have vaccines that we can have administered to help prevent infection by certain influenza viruses. And what happens is the World Health Organization gathers information on which type of flu is the one that's affecting the most people. And when they figure that out, they then use vaccines or create vaccines for those particular influenza viruses to limit how many people get sick. And also, the beauty of the vaccine is even if you get sick with a different type of flu, it may not be nearly as serious as it potentially could be, because you have you've been administered a vaccine. Another viral disease you may have heard of is hepatitis. Hepatitis is basically, if you break down the word, hepa refers to the liver, the organ that filters toxins from our body and helps us create new red blood cells. Itis means inflammation. So it's inflammation of the liver. So with hepatitis, there are vaccines for hepatitis B, but there are three main types of hepatitis that affect us a little differently. They do all affect the liver, but hepatitis A, usually people contract hep A by eating food or drinking water that's contaminated. Hepatitis B is usually transmitted through mixing of bodily fluids. And hepatitis C also, with blood transfusions, organ transplants, needle sharing, when we're talking about intravenous drug use, hepatitis C can be contracted or spread that way. So other pathogens to keep in mind: fungi, multicellular or unicellular primitive plants. They grow basically like a plant. They can lead to things like athlete's foot, tinea pedis, so to speak. If you look down here, if you've ever had that itchy rash on your foot, especially when you've been playing sports and sweating in your shoes and socks over and over, it can lead to athlete's foot. And then ringworm also. So different ringworm can be transmitted from skin to skin contact. Sometimes people who wrestle, for instance, can end up with ringworm because of that skin to skin contact. So that's our quick overview of infectious disease. You can expect questions to help with our analysis or assessment of our knowledge of infectious disease to accompany this video. Thanks for watching. Take care, guys. Bye.